polls between John Fetterman and Dr. Mehmet Oz are tightening. John Fetterman is showing some evidence that his stroke recovery is perhaps a bit slower than expected, or perhaps not as thorough as expected. He's having some speech issues and apparently some auditory processing issues. And so his first TV interview in quite some time used one of those prompters, one of those machines where he was able to read what the interviewer was saying. And the interviewer on NBC also pressed him on some health questions, and this ignited a firestorm both in mainstream media and independent media. All right, so let's get to this. We're going to play this first segment here. This is quick just to set this up.
Say you're on the road to full recovery, but right now voters really have to take your word for it. We've asked for your medical records. We've asked to have a conversation with someone from your medical team, to interview your physician. You've declined those requests. Why?
Well, I feel like we have been very transparent in a lot of different ways. When our doctor has already given a letter saying that I'm able to serve and to be running.
I mean, respectfully, that letter from your physician, that was 6 months ago. Don't voters deserve to know your status now?
Being in front of thousands and thousands of people and having interviews and getting around all across Pennsylvania, that gives everybody and the voters decide, if they think that it's really the issue.
All right. So they went back and forth for a little bit longer, but you kind of get the point there. All right. So that got some pushback from a lot of people, including wife of John Fetterman, Giselle Barreto Fetterman, who expressed her displeasure at that line of inquiry on the Fast Politics podcast, which came out 2 days ago. So let's hear a clip of her response and how she would like this handled.
With that interview yesterday, when the journalist sort of took some liberties with her sort of supposition of his health, how did you feel?
I don't like saying rage because I think that's a really unhealthy feeling. And when you feel those things, it only harms yourself. But I just, what a disservice that she did to not only my husband, but to anyone facing a disability and working through it. And I don't know how there were not consequences, right? I mean, there are consequences for folks in these positions who are any of the isms. I mean, she was ableist, and that's what she was in her interview. It was appalling to the entire disability community, and I think to journalism. So I was shocked. I'm still really upset about it. And I think the positive is it's brought a lot of conversations around accommodations, around rights, around ableism, right? I mean, ableism was trending on Twitter.
Okay. Russell, I know you're chomping at the bit. I just want to make one very quick point before I toss to you. What consequences does she want this journalist to face? What do you mean consequences? These guys, they're always out to fire somebody, always out to muzzle somebody. What consequence? What, because she asked a question about your health? Candidates have to make their medical records public. That's part of running for office. You had a stroke. They're asking you a question about your health. Now, you don't have to love the line of inquiry. You don't have to love the question. But consequences?
Right.
You want her fired over this? I'm sorry. These are not people I trust with power. I'm sorry. When Bernie went on Anderson Cooper, and Anderson Cooper sandbagged him with that bullshit Fidel Castro nonsense, he did, in my opinion, he did the world a great disservice by bringing up that issue out of nowhere. That cost a lot of people a lot by sandbagging him like that. I knew he was going to do that. I think he's a New World Order hatchet man piece of shit. I did not call for him to be fired from 60 Minutes. I didn't call for 60 Minutes to be canceled.
You're talking about Anderson Cooper. God knows what kind of weird skull and bones rituals he pulls in his basement.
Okay, but you understand the point that I'm making. The point that I'm making is I can hate a news personality. Yes. I can hate an interviewer all I want. I do not call for them to be silenced or thrown off the air. This is a sick thing. These people always, first, there should be consequences because she asked you a question. Nonsense. Nonsense.
It's the call the manager party. It's the call the manager movement. These are, and let me, before I dive in, let me make it absolutely clear. I think a sock puppet would make a better senator than Mehmet Oz. It's not about that. It's about the fact that a journalist went in and asked completely legitimate questions of somebody who has had a severe stroke, and we went right into clown world. Everybody, it's incredible, just had one narrative and immediately went to the woke take. Oh, it's ableism, because that's their go-to, right? Because it's very easy to put the ick on the person by doing that. Oh, it's ableism. So, for example, in BuzzFeed News, and I want to share this actually. All right, so disability activist Charis Hill told BuzzFeed News that they were so upset at Burns' questions and the editor's framing of Fetterman's responses, leaving in moments of silence that showed Fetterman reading, for example, that they couldn't finish watching the interview. Hill called on NBC to apologize for the overt discrimination they just put on air. The way Burns handled that interview will only worsen attitudes and violence towards disabled people in a time when virtual accommodations are being removed left and right after they were implemented overnight in 2020. So it seems like this is kind of a go-to. Is there a rash of violence against disabled people that I'm not aware of? Let me take a really courageous stand. I'm against that. Okay? But I'm not aware. I don't see how this interview is going to make people get up and say, you know what? There's a disabled guy down the block. Let me go commit violence against him. What are you even talking about? This is the problem here. It winds up making people not take the left seriously when they have legitimate complaints and legitimate concerns. Because outside of this little bubble of lobotomy cases who don't realize what a fucking joke this is, you look like an idiot running around saying, how dare this journalist commit an act of journalism against our preferred candidate? How dare she ask a stroke victim if he is capable of serving when he needs closed captioning to conduct the interview? Now, a lot of them, their spin is a lot of people are disabled. A lot of people, okay, that's fine. A lot of people who are disabled are not in the Senate. And then their next question will be, well, should they be disqualified from the Senate? Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. That's the purpose of these questions. Because unless I'm mistaken, they do not give you closed captioning in the Senate. And the Senate is all about listening to speeches all day, right? It's all about debate. Do they make that technology available for senators? My understanding is it's against the rules, actually, to have that kind of technology in the Senate chambers. Now, you could definitely...
I think it was James Madison who wrote that they are not allowed to do closed captioning in the Senate. I believe
that was it. I thought it was Adams.
We'll have to check the record on that, but I thought it was Madison.
No, okay.
He was old school like that, you know what I mean?
Maybe, I know. Well, you know, you're in college now. You're a college boy, so I'm gonna go with your take. That is how is that not relevant to the job? And then they're bringing up, and we'll get into some of these clips, they're comparing it to FDR being in a wheelchair. How the fuck do you compare that? He is not able to process spoken language. That is not relevant for a senator? Now, listen, I understand you don't want to see Dr. Crudite in the Senate. I don't want to see him in the Senate either. But that is not a reason to attack a journalist for doing journalism and then to go on. And again, you're right. That's terrifying. They go right to, well, this person should face consequences. This person should be fired. When I see that, as you say, I don't want these people anywhere near power. What will a world with people who think that a journalist who asks a stroke victim pointed questions about their capacity to serve, somebody who cannot process auditory information and needs closed captioning to attack this reporter as if that's out of line. What would these people do without any check on their power? How would they exercise it?
All right, so we're going to go to a couple of clips here. Before we do, our friend and patron James threw us a super chat. Thank you so much, my friend. Much appreciated. He says, props to Mrs. Fetterman for coddling her hubby. I love the coddling hashtag. I like that. It would be nice to see Dems fight as hard as against GOP policies as they do against mild criticism. Yeah. Look, and what I want to say, I just want to reiterate what I said before. Look, she's the wife of the candidate. They have a race they're trying to win. The vote is in 3 weeks. I got no problem with her pushing back on the inquiry. Whether it's legit, whether I agree with her pushing back on that or not, I understand. You're the wife of the candidate. You're trying to win. Fine. Calling for consequences, basically calling for her head, for her removal, that's out of bounds. That I'm not with. You could say it was a bullshit question. I don't personally agree it was a bullshit question, but like I said, the spot you're in, I get it. Okay, that's part of the campaign. It's part of, running a campaign down the home stretch. Don't call for her to be fired. That's just way over the line.
Well, that's what these people do. It's a pattern. They find a woke basis for prosecuting the person in the public square. And then once they've all gone in lockstep with that narrative and tried to build such an echo chamber that you are a monster if you even speak against this narrative. How could you even question this narrative? So there's a narrative that at first blush, before they build this consensus, is just clown world crazy. I don't think the average person, unless they're extreme partisan, would have watched that interview and thought it was out of line. But by the time they're done, oh, wow, I can't believe she said that, right? Once they build that consensus, now they go after the person.
Right. And speaking of echo chamber,
also a warning to anyone else.
Right. And speaking of echo chamber, let's play a couple examples of the echo chamber here. All right. So first up, we have Emma Vigeland from the Majority Report. Here is her take on this. Briefly, this isn't her entire take, but we don't want to sit here all night playing clips from other shows. So here is, in a nutshell, I thought the most clippable, sort of comment-worthy portion of her take.
Yes, he has to use transcription software right now. And would this be an issue if John Fetterman were deaf? Would this be an issue if John Fetterman were blind? Would you be highlighting that at the beginning of your piece? There are people who have auditory processing issues who need to use transcription software. Does that bar them from holding a Senate seat? Because that is the undertone of the piece.
Yes, actually, those would be legitimate questions. Would it necessarily disqualify them? Not necessarily, but yes, it's just weird. Like, would you ask someone who was deaf if they could serve in the Senate? Yes, I would. It's people making speeches all day. I would ask, is there a transcription? Is there something in the Senate chamber that will allow this person to follow the debate? Because
which there should be, by the way.
Yes,
we would advocate
there should
for that.
be.
Yeah.
There should be. I agree.
They wouldn't need a transcription service for you. You're coming in like 300 decibels here.
Too much.
We don't need closed captioning here.
We don't. We definitely.
I'm messing with you. Go ahead.
It's my French roast.
You're right. Exactly. Yeah, you got the coffee tonight. That's why.
Hey, man, it's better than blow.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to throw you off.
Yes. So, yes, I agree. You know what? There should be accommodations for people with these disabilities. But the question you have to ask is, are there? And if there are not, well, yes, that's a problem if someone is deaf. It is a problem if someone is blind and they're going to work in a job where you have to look at a lot of these Senate speeches involve visual aids. They love to bring in their charts and their whiteboards. Now, are there ways to deal with that? Are you going to do some kind of auditory aid to explain what you're saying? And again, I think there should be. I agree that that's a problem, that people with those disabilities perhaps can't serve in the Senate because they can't follow certain things that are happening in the Senate. But she's saying, would you ask those questions under these circumstances? Yes. Yes, you would. Like she says it like it's an own. Like, right. No, man, mic drop. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Yes, you would ask.
And look, this does not have to be that difficult. Like you said, Russell, you'd rather have a sock puppet in the Senate than Dr. Oz. When Bernie had a heart attack on the campaign trail, people were like, should he drop out? I said, hell no. I would support Bernie if he were dead over everyone else in that primary field. I would literally vote for a dead Bernie Sanders over Pete Buttigieg or Joe Biden or any of those other people. So this doesn't have to be complicated. This doesn't have to turn into this. Look, I had a stroke. I'm recovering. All right. There are some obstacles that I'm going to have to overcome, but I will overcome them, and I am fit to serve. And you should be absolutely transparent with medical records and doctor's notes. You shouldn't hand somebody a 6-month-old note and then say, leave me alone about it. Here, I'm doing rallies, whatever. Just be transparent. Like I said, this ultimately is going to come down to the issues, but I'll get to that in a second. Well, I want to play Anna's piece also, which I actually have not seen yet, so I'm going to watch this for the first time with all of you guys.
I edited together the highlights.
John Fetterman was treated poorly, to say the least, during his interview with NBC News. That interview was conducted by Dasha Burns, and she's now putting out a statement, kind of backtracking after she has received a flood of criticism for her ableist language and tone. Now, following that question and his answer, Burns pressed Fetterman over and over again on why he hasn't released his medical records. Keep in mind, by the way, he has been incredibly transparent about his stroke, about his condition, about his recovery process. He has shared a letter from his doctor indicating that he's doing well, he's recovering well, but that's not good enough. When are we going to see your medical?
Well, that wasn't good enough when Donald Trump did it. When Trump had a letter from his doctor saying he was Superman, you guys all mocked it as, this is any doctor can write you a note saying you're good to go.
Well, the way that she's saying it, like, well, obviously a stroke victim doesn't have to release his medical records. What a monster to ask
this
him
is not
to
like a new
release his
thing.
medical records.
Right. It's not a new thing. Candidates always, as a matter of form, release medical records.
Of course.
It's been a thing forever.
The man had a stroke, and this is something we were talking about offline, and this is part of what pisses me off about this whole thing. We moved over to the alternative media. I have the most
No, don't worry. I'm gonna play it again.
We moved over to the alternative media partly because in the corporate media, it's always so obvious that it's one rule for the people they align with. It's another rule for everybody else. Clearly, her take on this, if it were a Republican who had a stroke, who wasn't releasing his medical records, would not be this far outrage that someone would even ask. It would be outrage that those records were not being released. So what the fuck are you doing in alternative media? Why are you here? Why are you here? You are the AOC of alternative media. You are fucking useless. You are useless. We recruited you to do one thing, and now you're just doing the same thing as the thing we were trying to get away from.
Well, when you talk about a double standard, right, whereas liberals would think these are valid questions when aimed at Republicans but not at Democrats, this is true within the Democratic Party as well. Jordan Sheridan actually made this point on a stream when he covered this. It was a very good point. Progressives were not allowed to ask questions about Joe Biden's mental faculties during the Democratic primary. Yep. You're an ableist for doing that. Yep. When they were perfectly valid questions, and a lot of Bernie supporters were asking them because it was a vulnerability and a legitimate concern, obviously, 2 years later, right? Yep. And so even within the Democratic Party, this has been a sort of smear tactic against people who had questions about Joe Biden, right? Yep. So there's a double standard within the party itself. All right, let's go back.
Medical records. Where are your medical records?
I don't know if she has only ever cavorted around with angelic beings who are perfectly fit in body and mind, but I'm going to blow her mind right now. There are people who can't hear even as well as him. There are people who can't hear at all. There are people who can't see
You're
at
a
all, who
fucking
can't
idiot,
speak
John.
at all.
You're
There's
an
a
idiot.
variety of disabilities.
Well, they're not
that
fit to
doesn't
serve.
mean that
They're not fit to serve, according to Dasha Burns. You know, if you might want to run for Congress one day, but you have a disability like blindness, you might be deaf, you're just not fit to serve. Sorry.
What if you're paralyzed?
I mean, no, but
well, I mean, come on, can you really
That's
serve?
exactly the same
If
thing.
you can't walk, if you can't do a kip up, can you really serve?
One of the greatest presidents, if not the greatest president in United States history, was a disabled president, FDR.
Yeah, and you know what medium he used? Radio. You know what you need to listen to the radio? You need to be able to hear.
You need to be able to hear, and you need to be able to process auditory information.
Right.
Yeah.
Her handling and her commentary, let's just keep it real, because that's what this is.
Yeah.
She is communicating to the audience that she doesn't believe that he's fit to serve due to this temporary disability. And even if it weren't temporary, if we're dealing with someone who might need to read captions to understand.
First of all, I'm sorry. She's not saying he's not fit to serve. She's just asking him, what's the update on the stroke? That's it. She's not accusing him of being unfit to serve. I mean, what are you watching?
Well, because they want to burn the witch, they have to justify burning the witch by pretending that she didn't do journalism, that she did opinion. Because NBC is the network known for going hard at Democrats. That's why they have an anti-Democrat bias at NBC.
Right. Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Every time Donald Trump slurs a word, the Young Turks get millions of views off of it. Right? Millions of views off of it. This guy's unfit to be there. Look at this. What is he on? Is he on drugs? Is he losing his mind? Is he that?
He's framing it that way to justify the entire segment. No, we're not going after her for asking questions. We're going after her for inserting her opinion through the questions, because the questions are themselves an opinion.
But that's just, as a matter of fact, not what she did.
Well, of course. It's
not what she did at all. Yeah.
Understand the questions, whatever, for what's the word I'm looking for? For a longer period.
Oh, what's the word you're looking for? Are you fit to be on air, Anna? What's the word I'm looking for?
Of time.
Sure.
That doesn't mean that they're unfit to serve. Some people have disabilities, but they might be great candidates, great leaders. I mean, are we really having this conversation right now? We literally have a United States senator who has severe dementia. Okay? I mean, we're really having this conversation right now?
What the fuck does that have to do with anything? So you've got a senator with dementia, so we shouldn't be questioning a senatorial candidate who had a stroke? What the fuck does the one have to do with the other?
Right. Well, what they're doing
really
is
having that conversation right now.
They're pointing to that double standard as if two wrongs make a right. In other words, like, if we're not allowed to question Dianne Feinstein's mental faculties, because that's who she's talking about.
I'm happy to.
That's the logical flaw in what she's saying. She's saying, well, if Dianne Feinstein can serve with dementia, then why should we be asking these questions of John Fetterman?
Right.
But she shouldn't be, right? Right. Now, you want to point to a media double standard because, see, here's what I think is happening here, all right? And this is where we move past some of this.
Ben's asking who has dementia. Dianne Feinstein. It's
Dianne Feinstein. It's pretty much
you can't even call it an open secret because it's not a secret. They're just
right. It's not even a secret anymore.
It's like when Caligula named his horse an emperor. They're just going to let it happen.
Right. Exactly. Here's what I think is happening here. Yes, NBC and the corporate media at large, of course, they have a Democrat bias. They also have a corporate Democrat bias, and in their mind. And this is where I think we are ships passing in the night here. We're not exactly matching up. I don't mean you and me, Russell. I mean like shows like ours and TYT and things like that. Corporate media sees John Fetterman as of the Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. And so corporate media is not going to be as nice to him because they are out to discredit the Sanders wing. Now, we see John Fetterman. I see John Fetterman. I see what I've nicknamed him Rust Belt Obama. He plays the role of a working class populist Rust Belter with no substance to back it up. So I think John Fetterman is a bit of a fugazi, right? But Nonetheless, the media perceives him to be of the Sanders wing. And so they're not covering for him the way they would cover for Joe Biden or Dianne Feinstein. And to networks like TYT, who are still in the sort of Justice Democrat lane, still in the prop up the squad lane, they feel very protective of these Bernie-esque Democrat candidates. And so they see this as a real double standard. And they see this as the media having the knives out for John Fetterman, which may be true. I mean, I don't think they would, forget about not think, they did not press Joe Biden on these issues the way they pressed John Fetterman in that interview on these issues. They covered for Joe Biden.
As soon as they realized they weren't going to get their bloodless technocrat Buttigieg or their, marijuana crusader Harris, and they were going to be stuck with Biden, all of a sudden they went from Andrea Mitchell. She was questioning Biden's cognitive fitness.
Right. They shut all that down.
All of a sudden you were a fucking ableist monster if you asked those questions. And people see through it. This is the problem. This is why this is important. Look, I have enough of a Machiavellian streak that if this shit worked, I'd have a grudging respect for it. I might not like it, but I would give it its due. It doesn't work because it's very transparent to most people. Unless you are a hardcore partisan, unless you are very deep in this corporate media bubble, which probably means you have a class status that makes you invested in picking up elite narratives and projecting them to the people around you. Unless you're one of those people, this is a joke. It's ridiculous. Of course she has a right to ask those questions. You're not going to convince any rational-minded person who is not completely brainwashed that these are illegitimate questions to ask of a stroke victim running for the Senate. In the end, it hurts us to project these kinds of people into the forefront of what most people understand as the left. Because a lot of people still, even after all this schism, all this rift, they don't realize how much of a rift there is. They don't really realize we're all over here and they're all over there.
Yeah. Now, as it pertains to this race, the issue of John Fetterman's health, I actually think that Vigeland's made, a fairly decent and fairly obvious point later on in that Majority Report segment, which is that, ultimately this is going to come down to the issues. And I think she's right about that. I don't think his health is going to be a major factor in the outcome. My gut tells me, and it's not just my gut, it's also polling numbers, but my gut tells me that the reason we're seeing a swing in momentum back to the GOP, not as dramatic as swung to the Democrats in the immediate aftermath of Dobbs, but we have seen steady momentum back to the GOP in terms of polling as October has gone on. This really started early to mid-September, actually, is that the macro themes of the race are coming into focus. And there was a fascinating Harvard-Harris poll that came out over the weekend, which we're going to get into in our next live stream. This is a packed one, but it's fascinating. The top three issues on voters' minds are inflation, jobs, and immigration. And when you ask the question of voters, what are the Republicans' priorities ranked? Those priorities are, forget in which order, but they're those exact same three. Inflation, right. Jobs, border. When they asked voters what are the Democrats' most important issues, none of those issues ranked in top three. The perception is that the Democrats' number one issue, I remember this because it's fucking absurd, is January 6th, and then women's rights, and then green policy. So there is a perception out there, whether you think it's right or not, that Republicans just have their finger on the pulse of what most Americans care about, whereas Democrats don't. And coming down the home stretch of a race, the issues come into focus. And if one side is perceived to have their finger on that pulse and the other side is not, you're going to see momentum trend back to the GOP. So course. That is why Oz is rising. That's why Herschel Walker was rising until the, what came out, right? That's why Laxalt in Nevada is rising. That explains the trend, is that at the end of the day, the Democrats come off, as they always do, as just out of touch with the concerns of ordinary people.
Because
and
they are. Because they
right,
are. The Republicans may not actually care about helping people, but they always seem to have a better grasp on what people are actually talking about what people are actually caring about. They're not as informed by elite academic perspectives. That's just not the world that the average Republican politician is coming out of, and as a result, they're not blinded by that.
Please clap.